Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Native Plants at Noon on the road to Paintbrush Prairie. We have a great show for you today. My name is Sydney Ross. I'm the Outdoor Education Manager for Deep Roots. And before we begin, I'd like to go over just a couple show notes with you all. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Missouri Department of Conservation, for bringing people closer to nature, as well as bringing nature home. And I also want to thank viewers like you for making programming like this possible. This webinar will be recorded. All the resources will be available online, and I'll send you an email following the show. I'm very excited to tell you all about the hike that I'm leading in just a couple weekends. If you like what you see on the show today, you may consider joining us. We'll be taking a bus out to the prairie in Cole Camp, Missouri from the Discovery Center on Saturday, May 25th. Join nature enthusiasts and nerds like myself as we explore Paintbrush Prairie and Forever Prairie in Cole Camp, Missouri. It's going to be a day of fun. And before we dive into today's program, I want to just go over where we're going to be discussing in today's video and on our hike. Oh, and just kidding. Prior to that, I do want to make one more announcement. We have our upcoming Discover Native Gardening at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center 5 times a month. Our next session will be held this Saturday from 8 to 10 a.m. You can scan the QR code or watch for the link that I'll be dropping in the chat soon after my announcements. But if you like to have fun, connect with nature, and learn skills, consider joining us. It's a great way to discover native gardening. And our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, June 6th at noon. Our Lunch and Learn will be discussing the prairies of Shawnee Mission Park with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. Learn how they've stitched together old growth prairie, new prairie, and prairie reconstructions in about 2,000 acres across Shawnee Mission Park. Okay, so before we get started, I want to just read to you a little bit about Paintbrush Prairie. Now, this is a place I have visited several times. It's by far one of my favorite prairies here in the state of Missouri. It's about an hour and a half away from Kansas City. It is a cherty, dry mesic soil. So what that means is it's a different type of soil content and geological formations beneath the soil that contribute to the type of plants you'll find there. For example, you'll see paintbrush, which is the namesake, and that will be discussed in today's episode, as well as some of my other favorites: pale purple coneflower, yellow coneflower, goat's rue. They even have some really amazing fauna that depend on these remnant prairies. For example, they have the Regal Fritillary butterfly, which is isolated to some of these higher quality areas because they require a lot of nectar and pollen as they are laying eggs to continue the next generation. You may also be lucky enough to see the super rare pink short-winged katydids. I have yet to find them, but on our hike on May 25th, you bet your boots I'll be looking for them. So this is a very cool area to visit. And after this program, I'm hoping that we can get Lisa San Diego, the natural history biologist, who did a wonderful job presenting this program, to talk a little bit more about this. And actually, I think I may hear Lisa. Lisa, can you hear us okay? Possibly not. Okay, so we'll work on that. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy this Native Plants at Noon episode on the road to Paintbrush Prairie.
All right, now today we're going to talk about some of the plants that are blooming today on this remnant prairie. And we're on Paintbrush Prairie, which gets its namesake from Indian paintbrush, this plant down here. Now this is honestly one of my favorite prairie plants because it's a very unusual plant. For one, this bright color is just fascinating. It's this nice orangey coral color. It can also come in yellow as well. And these are actually not the petals of the flower, it's just the bracts that are these bright colors, kind of like a poinsettia. Now the flowers themselves are actually very, very tiny up here, like this little guy. Now, this plant is also a hemiparasite, meaning that it actually gets some of its nutrients from the roots of the plants around it and steals it and uses it for itself. Now, it still needs to be pollinated by hummingbirds and queen bumblebees, and it's visited by a variety of bees as well. All right, so here we have some prairie plants that are blooming right now. So this is cream wild indigo, which is in the legume family, like a bean. And you can tell from the flowers that are this beautiful cream color. They look like little bean flowers. Now this plant is an early spring blooming prairie plant, and it's very important for long-tongued pollinators, such as queen bumblebees. What's interesting about this plant too is as it gets older, it turns black, and all of the foliage, the leaves, will turn black as well, making it relatively easy to ID later in the year. Now we have here also a pale purple coneflower that's just getting ready to go. You can see it's not quite ready to bloom yet, but it will be blooming in just a few weeks. Like here's an old flower stalk from last year that's holding on. And the leaves are they're very pubescent and fuzzy, and the petals will be this really nice pale, well, as the name implies, pale purple color, and you'll see them dotted all over the prairies. All right, now we have some more. So this plant here is Golden Alexander, which is in the carrot family. And it's an interesting plant because one, it's a big host for the black swallowtail butterfly, and it can also be an abundant seed producer in a garden setting. And it's interesting because it has a very light scent that some people actually don't like. I personally like it. Now down low here amongst the small grasses and small plants, we have some what's called yellow star grass, which is funny because it's not a grass at all. It's actually in the lily family, these small yellow flowers here. And it does not produce any nectar, it only produces pollen. And it needs to be cross-pollinated in order to reproduce. So it's a nice little addition in on the prairies. All right, now here's a very interesting flower. So this is called shooting star, and it's in the primrose family. It's a very bizarre looking kind of downward pointing flower. And it's pollinated by queen bumblebees with buzz pollination, where they actually vibrate the flower to get the pollen out. And it's an interesting plant that it's hard to find later in the year because it only has this little circle of basal leaves. That's it. So later in the year it can be hard to find. And it's interesting because it can come in a variety of colors. So we have kind of a pale pinky purple here, but over here we have some white ones. Let's check those out. So here is a nice big inflorescence of white shooting star. Same species, just slightly different color of flowers. It's a nice robust plant here. And it's an extra interesting plant too, because a noted botanist once said that he thinks that the flowers smelled like grape juice and the roots smelled like canned corned beef. Kind of odd. I've never smelled the roots. I've smelled the flowers. It has a very light scent, perhaps like grape juice. But let's see. Also over here, we have this plant here, prairie ragwort. It has this nice little cluster of yellow daisy-like flowers at the top. And it's called ragwort because the leaves have a ragged, dissected appearance. And it's visited by a variety of small bees and flies and other pollinators. And I also want to briefly talk about another plant here that's not blooming yet, but will be soon. So this is sensitive briar, which I don't really want to touch, but you can see that it's covered in many thorns. And it's called sensitive briar because if you touch the leaves, they fold up. It's a sensitive little plant. And I want you to look for this plant flowering in just a few weeks in the year, or a few weeks later, because the flowers are these bright magenta Barbie pink pom-pom flowers. A very unusual flower and a nice welcome sight to see on the prairie. All right, now we have another flower that's actually not yellow, and this is pale beardtongue. And it's an interesting little plant. It's small, it's fuzzy. And if you look closely at the flower, at the base of the flower, there's a hairy staminoid, and that is what gives it its name because people think it resembles a hairy tongue. So this is pale beardtongue, and it's visited by long-tongued bees like bumblebees. There's actually a specialist mason bee that visits only these types of flowers. All right, now here we have some low-growing flowers on a prairie. You can't get much lower than this. So this is bird's foot violet, and it's named that because the leaves kind of resemble a bird's foot, with lots of toes on this one. Now, it's an interesting plant because for violets, it's visited by more butterflies than any other violet because the flowers tend to be oriented face up. So it's a nice, easy landing pad. And you can see these dark lines on this lower petal here. Those are nectar guides. So it helps direct small pollinators to the nectar and pollen source so it can be pollinated. And it's an important violet that we see on prairies and glades. Now we have another violet here who's not blooming, but will be soon. This is arrow-leaved violet. So you can see the leaves are kind of shaped like an arrowhead. And it's an important violet, especially for the Regal Fritillary butterfly, which is a tracked butterfly in Missouri. It's a prairie butterfly, and its caterpillars only eat violet leaves. So they might be small flowers, but they're very important on the prairie. All right, now here's a beautiful flower right here. So this is wild hyacinth, which has typically this beautiful kind of periwinkle blue, light purple color with this bright yellow pollen. And it's visited by a variety of bees, butterflies, wasps, really quite a variety of pollinators like it. And it has these long kind of strap-like leaves at the base that kind of look like a grass, really. And it's an interesting plant. Its scientific name is Echinacea, and it comes from the word kamas, which means sweet, and it does smell very slightly sweet. All right, now here's a plant I wasn't planning on talking about, but it's everywhere today. So this is called toadflax, and it's this cute, very interesting little purple flowers with, look at this really long spur coming off the flower. That helps you identify it as a toadflax. And I love how delicate in appearance they are. Now, another plant that's very delicate that I wasn't planning on talking about, but it's everywhere, are these bluets, least bluets. Talk about minuscule. They're very small, and we typically see them on glades as well, which makes sense because this is a very rocky prairie, which contributed to it being a remnant prairie because it was difficult to plow with all the rocks. Now, there's another plant here that's not blooming yet, but it will be soon, and that's this one, so goat's rue. It's in the bean family with these very pubescent leaves, and in a couple weeks it will have these beautiful pink and cream flowers. Now, oh look, here's another little spring plant. So this is false garlic, which I'm a little surprised to see because typically we see it a little bit earlier in the year, but this guy's holding out just for you. So there's actually quite a lot of things blooming today, and more things will be blooming in the weeks to come. All right, now here's another plant that we got lucky and found a huge patch of it. So this is violet wood sorrel. It has these beautiful pale purple flowers. Now its scientific name is Oxalis violaceae, and the violaceae for the violet colored of these beautiful petals. And if you have shamrock at home, you can see how similar it is. It's very clover-like, yeah, just like the one you might see in a garden. And it's a beautiful plant that we see on prairies and rocky glades, which makes sense because this is a very rocky prairie. And here today, it's hanging out with this cream wild indigo that we saw earlier. And it's hanging out in this area, it's a Mima mound here, which has some woody vegetation shrubs on it. And you can see that the base of these shrubs are black with char, because this prairie was burned last fall to mimic the natural fires that would keep prairies open. So it's a nice little surprise to find this little. All right, now here's another plant in the carrot family. It's a cousin, so to speak, of golden alexanders that we saw earlier. So this is prairie parsley, and it's named so because the leaves kind of resemble the parsley herb. And it's an interesting plant because it's a conservative plant, meaning it's only found in high quality, intact prairie habitats. And it's also, like the golden alexander, the host to the black swallowtail butterfly. All right, now here's a nice little find, a really good splash of pink in the prairie. So this is prairie phlox, which you see a lot of garden phloxes available in different stores, but this is a native prairie one. And this particular one is this kind of bright magenta pink color, but we have seen phloxes range from purple to white. Some of them have even some more white at the base of the flower petal. So they can come in a variety of colors, and even the petal shapes can vary a little bit within in the species. All right, here's another plant that's very interesting. It's called spiderwort, and we typically see it as this dark purple, dark blue color with that bright yellow pollen. And it's an interesting plant because it has very long strap-like, almost grass-like leaves. And it gets its name spiderwort because some people think that the arching leaves kind of resemble a spider leg. But others call it spiderwort because if you break it, the sap is kind of a sticky, kind of like spider web. So it's an interesting plant that we have on the prairie, just this bright, vibrant color. And there's another plant over here I want to point out. So roses are a very important part of a prairie. We have a couple different species of native rose that we see on prairies, and they don't grow huge. They usually stay rather small and contained. And this little guy here is a pasture rose, Rosa Carolina, and we're lucky enough to get it in the bloom. It's the first blooming rose I've seen this year. And it won't get honestly much larger than that. They stay pretty small and contained. So it was a nice little find. Okay, so here we are on Goodnight-Henry Prairie. It's a remnant public prairie owned by the Missouri Prairie Foundation. And we are still in the High Lonesome Priority geography, and we're only like 10 minutes away from Paintbrush. It's one of the 6 public remnant prairies that are very clustered together, so great to visit. And I wanted to bring us here to talk about this plant. So this is prairie alum root. Another name for this in the nursery trade is coral bells, because there's many cultivars and types of heucheras that you can buy in a traditional nursery. And this plant, it only has basal leaves, and it produces flowers on these very long stalks. Now this plant, the flowers aren't quite open yet, but I got some open flowers right here. So here's more heuchera. The stalks are a bit shorter, but the flowers are open. So these tiny flowers here, you can see that they're very kind of pale yellow to green, so not necessarily showy, but nonetheless very important to small bee pollinators. And there is actually a native cellophane bee that is a specialist of heucheras. It only visits plants of this genus. And you can often find these basal leaves around after the plant is done blooming, because the leaves tend to have like an astringent taste for deer, so deer tend to avoid it. So here in Goodnight-Henry Prairie, we have something extra special to show you. So I'm currently standing in a prairie swale, which is a rare natural community kind of embedded within the prairie here. And you won't find this at any other of the public remnant prairies in this area. So I wanted to show you one plant that's blooming, because typically a lot of the plants you see in swales are various rushes and sedges and aren't very showy. But this little guy is cute. So let's take a look. So this white blooming flower here is spring cress. It is in the mustard family, and it produces these kind of delicate white flowers. And we're finding it here in the swale because it needs a very moist environment to grow. It's currently standing in water. And the scientific name is Cardamine bulbosa, and bulbosa is named for its bulbous corms underground. So it's a neat little blooming plant that we can find this time of year. And here I wanted to show a tiny little delicate plant that might be easily overlooked. So this is pale spiked lobelia. It's one of the smaller lobelias, so it's like a cousin to cardinal flower. But it has these delicate blue to kind of pale purple flowers. And we've been seeing this all over the prairies today. And there's another plant I want to show you that's a really nice prairie plant. So here. So this, let's get that out of the way. This is a large flowered tick seed. It's a large flowered coreopsis. And it's a mid-conservative prairie plant that we see. And this one is the very first bloom we've seen this year. You can see this little flower bud here is getting ready to go. This is the very first one we've seen, and it's May 9th today. And these are interesting plants, easy to ID by the large flower head. This one's a little ragged, but it shows the size. And it has very dissected leaves, like that. There's a lot of different lobing there. And it's a Coreopsis genus, so that means that it has kind of two different kinds of bracts underneath the flower, here, oops, and here. So that's how you can help identify this plant. And its scientific name, Coreopsis, actually means bug-like because the fruits of the plant resemble ticks or an insect. And this little plant here I wanted to show you because it's another parasite. So again, its roots then parasitize the surrounding plants to help give it some nutrients. And this little guy is called false toad flax. And it has these very small kind of cream white blooms and little clusters at the top. And this is really about as big as this plant gets. It stays pretty small. And it's visited by a variety of bees and other pollinators. And its oily fruits are eaten by birds and small rodents. So it's an interesting little plant. It is a conservative plant, but we're on a high quality remnant prairie, so I would expect to see it here, and here we have. It blooms early spring into kind of late or like midsummer, so we'll be seeing it for a few more weeks. All right, now I have a tiny little plant that's in the rose family, but does not look like a rose. So this is cinquefoil. And it is our native cinquefoil flower. And it's just this little drop of bright yellow that stays pretty low to the ground and has interesting palmate or hand-like leaves that always have 5 leaflets, and that's how you can tell it's the native one. It is visited by small bees and flies, and the foliage is eaten by many small mammals. So it's not a strict prairie plant, but it's a little flower that we see in a variety of habitats, but still an important pollinator source. And it's a nice little kind of treasure to find in the grass at a prairie. Okay, so I'm here in this really nice patch of native dandelions. So I know you're probably familiar with the dandelions you find in your yard that are often considered noxious weeds. But dandelions are an excellent source of pollen and nectar for our native pollinators. And these are some native dandelions that we have. They're a different genus than the ones you find in your yard. They're Krigia species. But here we have some right here. I'm going to get a closer. There's a little native bee on this one. We can see without scaring it off. It's a little metallic green sweat bee. So it's a nice demonstration. Oh, there he goes. A nice demonstration of how important these are to our native bees and wasps and flies and butterflies. Then we had a little beetle hanging on to this one. Ah, oh, there he goes. Well, it's a little bit windy today, so they're kind of getting blown around. But they're a beautiful dandelion, and some of our native dandelions are very small flowered. I mean, some of their flowers are only about this big, but this is a larger, more showy species. And you can see there's just a nice little field of them sprinkled in all the other prairie plants.
Hello, that was so wonderful. I just want to give a special shout out to Lisa San Diego and Krista Noel for their help creating that wonderful rapid fire prairie bloom episode. I don't know about you, but I am very excited to get out there and see what's blooming since. That was filmed on May 9th, and we're here on May 16th. So I'm sure there's even more that has come up. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Lisa to the virtual stage. And as they are getting on here, I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. So Lisa San Diego works with Krista, the natural history biologist for Missouri Department of Conservation in the Kansas City region. Lisa is the assistant natural history biologist. She's been working in this position for 5 years, and in this role, she conducts surveys of tracked species of conservation concern, participates in community science surveys of bumblebees, butterflies, birds, answers natural history questions from the public, and assists with the myriad of job duties that make up Natural History Biology. I think Lisa has a very cool job, and I'm very excited for her to come on and tell us more about her experience as a natural history biologist and just what you love to do out in the prairie. Hey, Lisa,
Hello, can you guys hear me okay?
we can hear you just
Fabulous.
great.
Okay,
Yay!
great. First, I just want to briefly say I do apologize for the technical difficulties we had in the beginning. I had to jump through 3 different devices and now I'm on my phone. So I'm glad it's working well now.
Hey, I'm just excited that you're here because I think you're really cool. I love the work that you do for the department and just how you impact our community. So thank you so much for joining us. And darn technology, it happens sometimes.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. So
Yeah.
just a little bit about my job. I work with Krista, who's not here right now because she's on vacation, a much needed one, so can't get angry at her for that. Um, so I work in natural history, and that's basically of everything. It's kind of a jack of all trades. It's, I work in a variety of natural community types, woodlands and forests, and prairies, of course, and glades. Work with a variety of plants and animals, primarily non-game animals. So, I do butterfly surveys, we do bird surveys. Last night I was surveying for a prairie mole cricket out at the Coal Camp Prairies last night till pretty late in the evening. So it's a variety, it's a huge variety. And that's why I love it so much, to be honest. I like to I want to know everything, and there's still obviously loads and loads of things that I still need to learn. But that's why I love this job. So it's kind of everything. It's all the cool stuff, I think. I think it's one of the best jobs in the department. I'm a
I
little
think
biased,
so
but
too. I think so too. I think it's really cool. So I have to ask you about those mole crickets. Well, first, tell our audience about mole crickets and tell us if you heard any last night.
yes. So I saw a question in the chat. My name is Lisa San Diego. I'm the Assistant Natural History Biologist for the Kansas City region with the Missouri Department of Conservation. So that is my title. And just, yeah, briefly for prairie mole crickets, because it's very pertinent right now, they're our largest cricket. And it's a mole cricket, which there's a couple different species. I highly encourage you to Google it because they're pretty cool looking. They have very large claws in their forelegs to help them dig burrows. And during this time of year, the males dig acoustic burrows underground and they call to attract females. What's also fascinating is they perform, so so to speak, in a lek, kind of like prairie chickens, if you've heard of that. A bunch of males come together because basically they've kind of discovered, I suppose, over the generations, that if you get a bunch of males together singing, it attracts more females than just having a few of them alone on a prairie. So at night, for 1 hour after sunset, the males call to attract females. And I have to use a special app on my phone to record the frequency of their calls so that I can differentiate it from the northern mole cricket, which is a more common non-tracked species, because the prairie mole crickets are only found on tall grass prairies.
That's
It's like
very cool.
paintbrush. There's
Yeah,
plenty there.
exactly. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And so do they only make their calls at night then?
Yes, the males only call from sunset to 1 hour after sunset. That is it. Yeah.
Wow,
It
that's
definitely makes serving multiple sites a little interesting,
yeah.
because you listen for like 10 minutes or okay, I gotta go, and you're like speeding, not speeding, of course. You're driving quickly to another location to listen there because you can only hit close ones because you only have an hour total. And sometimes they stop calling after only half an hour as well.
Oh my gosh. And I remember you mentioning in the video that Coal Camp has a nice selection of public remnant prairies. Could you tell us first maybe define what a remnant prairie is and talk a little bit about that location in general?
Yes. So we kind of colloquially call them the Coal Camp Prairies. They are a group of prairies in our high lonesome priority geography, which is an area that was kind of designated by the department to kind of focus our energy and resources on, because we only have so many people, only have so much money and time to do management and to work and improve these lands. So in the Coal Camp area, which is an area south of Sedalia and north of Coal Camp, there's 11 public lands in that area, and many of them are remnant prairies. They're owned either by the Missouri Department of Conservation or Missouri Prairie Foundation. And I mean, like I said, there's like 6 that are just like clustered very close together. So it's nice to hit them all. And for remnant prairies, they need to have, I'm just checking my notes here. It means that they have an intact structure. So they've been never plowed, they've never been terraced. They have intact composition, so they have a diverse flora. And they have intact processes. And that means, you know, if it has for example, a prairie, a headwater stream running through it, it hasn't been altered in any way. So it has to have all of those 3 components to be considered a remnant prairie. Now, I've been on many high quality prairie reconstructions, but they do not compare to a true remnant prairie. They just cannot get the diversity that a remnant has. And that's partially due to the mycorrhizal fungi that live in the soil. That aids to that diversity. You just can't replicate that. And there's been some studies looking actually into inoculating that fungi into reconstructions to try to get that replicated, but it still isn't quite the same as a remnant prairie. And that's why it's so important to conserve them, because there's so few left.
Yeah, absolutely. That is just so remarkable, and just it boggles the mind. And I just want to ask, so is it safe to say that on a remnant prairie, these have some of the same plant species that have been there since, you know, for millennia?
Yep. Since people have been on the landscape. Because prior to European settlement, Native Americans used fire on the landscape to, you know, and along with, of course, natural fire from lightning strikes as well. So if you're on a remnant prairie, you're seeing the same plants that you would have seen thousands and thousands of years ago.
That is so cool.
Of
Okay, we have a couple questions from our audience.
course.
And our viewers, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A so we can answer them. Okay, Val is asking, is it possible or impossible to grow hemiparasitic plants in your garden? Do you have any experience with this, Lisa?
I have currently failed experience, but some of them, like lousewort, it's a pedicularis, I've read that you can grow it in a pot if you have other plants in there with it. For example, like oats or some or like a grass. And I purchased a seed packet of that lousewort from a native nursery, and I put it around some little blue stem that I have in my garden. And it hasn't grown yet, but I might try again. I mean, the seed packet was only like $3, so I would like it. So I think it is. I've heard that it's possible, but I do not have personal experience with it yet. I keep saying yet. I would definitely say just only purchase your native plants from reputable native nurseries, because do not dig these plants up. Most native prairie plants have extremely deep roots, and they do very poorly if you just dig them out of the ground and stick them in your yard, because your yard also is not going to be the same as a remnant prairie. There are many reputable native nurseries where you can purchase these plants from.
Absolutely. I like to say, take pictures, not plants, when you're out
Yeah.
in nature. And I appreciate you saying that, because it is so important to remind. And I know we're preaching to the choir here, but it bears repeating, you know, keep native plants safe where they are. So,
Yeah.
on that paintbrush topic, Merv at Missouri Wildflower Nursery is one reputable nursery that sells the seed packets too. And we visited his nursery a couple months ago. He suggested kind of what you're saying, planting it with other grasses. And I think he mentioned Indian grass and maybe a
Okay.
little blue stem as
Okay.
being, so I don't know. But I keep us
Mhm.
posted, because I would love to hear from you or from anyone else who has had experience with that.
Of course, I'm going to keep trying. And I know, Sydney, you have a lot of experience gardening as well. So you'll have to keep trying too.
I will. We threw some into one of the prairie circles at the Discovery Center that has those grasses. So I'll actually have to go check this weekend during my Discover Native Gardening session to see how
hmm
it's doing.
Yep. And as you know, native plants can start off pretty slow,
That's
but then they
right.
really start popping in a couple of years. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, so Janet has a question. How extensive is the Kansas City region of Missouri Department of Conservation?
Of course, yeah, because the name makes you think that it's just kind of local around the metro, and that is not true at all. So the
Yeah.
Kansas City region spans 12 counties in kind of west central Missouri. So we go up to Platte County and Platte City. Into the north, to the east, we hit Pettis and Benton counties. So, of course, Sedalia, Warsaw. And then down south, we go to Vernon County and kind of St. Clair. So we hit Nevada and El Dorado Springs. That's kind of our boundary.
Nice. That's pretty
Mhm.
broad, but that I appreciate that you have that nice reach with all those counties.
It is, and there's a lot of diversity in this region. We have prairies and glades and woodlands, of course, because we're just on the edge of the Ozarks. Yeah, there's a lot of diversity nearby. hmm
Cool. Okay, so I have a pop quiz for our viewers. Um, and if you're the first one to get this answer correct, you will get your own set of um, Nancy Waugh native plant note cards. Aren't these beautiful?
Oh, I
And
love those illustrations.
I do too. I'm a huge fan of those. And I recently learned that Nancy Waugh lives actually in the Flint Hills, the tallgrass prairies in Kansas, in a Civil War era stone house. And I'm like, that sounds like the life for me as an artist and naturalist. So for the quiz, I want the first correct answer of which conservative butterfly depends on prairie violets in the tallgrass prairies of Cole Camp, Missouri. Be the first one to get the answer correct of what species of butterfly is dependent on the violets in the prairie. And we need the full name. Doesn't have to be the scientific, but at least the first two parts. Okay, let's see. It looks like Ann Mans, you were the first one to get it correct. It is the Regal Fritillary. There are several types of fritillary butterfly, but the Regal is the one of conservation concern. And Lisa, could you go ahead and talk a little bit again about that butterfly and why it is important on that prairie?
Of course. So regal fritillaries, they require tall grass prairie habitat. The females use only violets to lay their eggs near because the larvae only eat those violet leaves. And I have been a part of, I assisted with a study where I was out on a prairie in April looking for chewed violet leaves. I've seen their little caterpillars. They're incredibly tiny. So regal fritillaries, they do use this remnant prairie habitat. However, especially, nowadays remnant prairies are kind of like a little patchwork across the landscape. There's not very many large contiguous tallgrass prairies anymore. However, some recent studies have shown that these regal fritillaries will fly between these remnant prairies. So they'll even fly over Highway 65, which is south of Sedalia. They can actually travel some significant distances to reach the habitat. And I love these butterflies because they're big and showy. And if you're in the right habitat, like a high quality prairie, you will probably see them in the summer. And which I just love, to be able to see a rare animal so easily because they're large. They're To me, when they fly, they look orange and then black and white. So they're as large as a monarch butterfly. So they're large, like orangey butterfly, but the underside of the wing has kind of like black and white coloration. So they're actually relatively easy to ID as they fly around. You see that kind of flash of black and white, and you're like, oh, that's not a monarch, that's a regal. And they'll be coming out soon. We usually start coming out in June. And they're actually sexually dimorphic as well. So the males and females have different coloration. They still are, the same general orange with the black and white, but in terms of spot coloration, they differ. So they're a large, showy species.
That's awesome. And Val has a follow-up question to that.
Mhm.
And this will be the last question before we go. But Val is asking if some violets are more attractive to the Regal Fritillary than others.
Yes. So the prairie violet, Viola petidifida,
something.
Wait, let me see. I might have
That
it here.
that is preferred. However, in some areas, bird's foot violet is used, as well as arrow-leaved violet. I don't know if they've really been documented on our common wood violet, which is probably the violet that everyone has in their yard, including myself, which I personally love. So they like those kind of more grassland violets, which makes sense because that's where their habitat is.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, this has been such a treat. I really enjoyed the program today. You all showed an abundance of prairie flowers, and I cannot wait to go out there and visit in a couple weeks and see what else is blooming on the prairie.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And I can tell you, because I was just out there recently, since the videos, more things are blooming. Like it is constantly changing. And yeah. So I highly encourage everyone to check out these prairies. The spring is the best time because it's before it gets too hot.
That's right. I totally agree with that. Okay, and before I let you all go, I'm just going to pop this up here because if you would like to join me and Lisa Richter, naturalist from Missouri Department of Conservation, we are going to lead a tour out to this prairie. So Lisa, thank you again for your help today. It was awesome to learn with you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Of course. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Native Plants at Noon, Paintbrush Prairie, and Goodnight-Henry. If you liked what you saw, join me on Saturday, May 25th for an all-day adventure out on the prairie. We're going to take a bus from the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center down to Cole Camp for a day of fun. You can scan the QR code there or go into the chat to find that link. I will post it there in just a moment. Also, visit us online at deeproots.org. I'll be sending out a short survey. If you don't mind filling that out to let us know how we did today, I would greatly appreciate it. All right, happy gardening, and I hope to see you on the prairie.